I cannot believe that I am saying this, but I have finally seen Dune Part 2, my most anticipated movie of the past 2 years. I've been so excited to talk about this movie with you all, and today I finally get that privilege. So guys, let's get into it. This is going to be a full spoiler-free review. I am someone who is being exposed to Dune from these movies. I have no knowledge of what happens in the books, so I'm not even going to talk about that. You are in safe hands here if you don't want to know a single thing apart from very vague aspects of this movie that I'll lightly go into. Starting off, I have been a massive fan of Dune since Part 1 released a few years ago, and the final line of that movie, spoilers for Dune Part 1, when Chani says to Paul, "This is just the beginning," I was absolutely on the edge of my seat and just ready to watch Dune Part 2 at that stage. And finally Denis Villeneuve has given this to us. A mastermind in the sci-fi genre, someone who has been on just a wonderful run, and this looked to be no different, and it isn't. This might be Denis Villeneuve's greatest achievement to date. There's a lot of hype surrounding this movie, comparing it to legendary sequels like Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, The Empire Strikes Back, The Dark Knight. That's very, very big shoes to fill. And even though I was really excited for this movie, I didn't know if it could actually reach that potential. And I never say this after a first watch of a movie, but this might be one of my favorite movies of all time, and I do think it belongs in that company. Dune Part 2 is a cinematic feat that has not been achieved, I believe, in about 20 years since we had the Lord of the Rings franchise. Dune Part 2 is a masterclass in blockbuster filmmaking, acting, directing, writing, across the board. I cannot find a single flaw with this movie. I truly believe at this stage it is a masterpiece, and I do think that when everyone gets the chance to see it, they're going to be blown away by what this actually manages to accomplish. And I'm going to tell you why I think that. Once again, staying away from spoilers. Firstly, this delivers on what Part 1 set up. A lot of people that criticized Dune Part 1 said it was all set up, all build up, no payoff. So it was quite expected that I think Dune Part 2 was going to be the payoff when Part 1 was all the setup. And I do think that setup was required to make Part 2 feel as satisfying as it does. So I think for those of you who are going to screenings back to back of Part 1 and Part 2, you're going to be in for a treat, because I do think this is just the beautiful next step that pays everything off that we saw in Part 1. All the little details, all the little hints. We finally get some answers to that, and Denis Villeneuve just does it in the most satisfying way. I think Dune fans are going to be extremely happy. You finally have the definitive adaptation of this classic novel that a lot of people said was unadaptable. Another criticism that a lot of people had with Part 1 was that some characters you don't see too often, like Zendaya's Chani. Well, that definitely gets remedied here. Chani has a massive role to play here, and I love the performance from Zendaya. She is truly the heartbeat of this film, the emotional anchor of this film. Her character is easy to connect with, and I love the dynamic that she has with Paul Atreides. What they have is very special in this film, and it makes some beats that happen in the third act feel really impactful. That's as far as I'll go there. We also get Stilgar, who surprisingly has a little bit more to do here. Javier Bardem, fantastic actor. We didn't really see too much of him in Part 1. We see a lot more of him here, and I thought he was fantastic. He was surprisingly funny. There was a lot of great lines from him that made my whole audience laugh, including myself. And he's able to turn that on a dime when it is required of him. It just shows the beauty of his acting. He is so fantastic in this film. And like what a really good sequel does, it builds off the first one. It expands the world of Dune a lot more, but it feels manageable. It doesn't feel like it's too much. It's giving you the right amount of information at the exact right time. So you're just on the ride for this movie. Sure, there are some complexities to this narrative that could be unwoven and deciphered after multiple rewatches, which is the beauty of Dune. Part 1, I've seen it 4 times, and I've finally got to grips with this narrative. So that was a kind of complex world that it was building up. Part 2 is, I think, actually a little bit more digestible, especially if you've seen Dune Part 1 a few times. As you're already accustomed to this world, you understand the characters that inhabit it, and some of the families and factions, like the Fremen, the Harkonnens, and House Atreides. You also get to see Paul interact with the world of Arrakis a little bit more. In the trailer, the only thing I'll talk about, and this is featured prominently in the first trailer, he attempts to ride a sandworm, and when you see that scene play out in a cinema on a massive screen, it is mesmerizing stuff. There has not been sound in a theater this good since Oppenheimer. No word of a lie. It was immersive. It pulls you right into the movie. It does exactly what good sound is supposed to do. It's more than just loudness. It's a surround sound that just draws you right into the scene. And when he's trying to ride the sandworm, that is definitely one of it. You feel this massive rumbling, and you just feel the power and size of these sandworms, even more so than Part 1. I really think that a lot of the things that Part 1 sets the groundwork for, Part 2 just leaps and runs with these ideas to the point where it's just pure ecstasy. This film just delivers one thing after another, satisfying beat after satisfying beat. There's complexities here. There is real nuance here. There's fantastic performances in here that we just don't see from blockbusters that often anymore. We got to a point where blockbusters drew massive crowds, but they weren't the best movies around anymore. When 20, 30 years ago, they were. They had a good combination of intimate moments with a massive scale. And Dune Part 2 pulls that right back to the forefront. Now, going into some of the houses a little bit, we get a lot more there too. So firstly, the Harkonnens, obviously the villains of this narrative. In Part 1, they do a lot of evil stuff. And Part 2, there's still that threat, and you get to see the enormity of that here. And someone that really brings that to life is Austin Butler's character, Fade. Now, I think there's been a lot of mystery surrounding this character. Me personally, I tried to be very light on trailers and teasers. I really just saw the first one, and maybe the second one when it popped up in a theater before a movie. But I had not heard this character speak. I think a lot of us were a little bit nervous because there's this big thing about Austin Butler having the Elvis voice, and if he's going to sound like that with this character, I don't think so. I think that, like what he did with Elvis, he completely immersed himself and really embodied this character. He is a threatening villain, and every scene with this character, I was hooked. And his scenes working with Timothée Chalamet's Paul Atreides was mesmerizing stuff on screen. Some of the best things that I've ever seen in filmmaking. Another new element here is the Emperor, played by Christopher Walken, and Florence Pugh. They have these very interesting characters that tie in with Paul Atreides and the Bene Gesserit. And I really, really liked what they did here. They're really effective in pushing forward a lot of moments in the narrative. And there's just a lot of fascination there that, once again, could be a foundation for the future of this franchise. I've spent too long not talking about a protagonist, and that's because there's a lot to him. Paul Atreides is just a wonderful, wonderful character. He's so interesting, and every single decision that he makes sense within the narrative. There are all these twists and turns with this character that Dune Part 2 loves to explore, and it never once feels sloppy rushed, it's perfectly executed, and Timothée Chalamet gives arguably his best performance to date. I'm a big fan of Timothée Chalamet. Ever since Call Me By Your Name, I've seen a lot of his performances from big to small stuff. And I really think this is up there with some of his best stuff. It is amazing. I actually think that he is deserving of an Academy Award nomination for this movie. You don't see that with many blockbusters. And I wouldn't be convinced in giving a lot of these blockbuster performances an Oscar nomination, because they don't go as far as what Timothée Chalamet does with Paul Atreides. There are monologues in this film. There are moments of quiet acting, loud acting. It's everywhere. And there's a lot riding on his shoulders here. If Timothée Chalamet does not give a good performance here, this movie falls to the wayside. It really needs him to deliver, and he does. Just completely evolves as a character from part one. There's more that he's doing here. And this film is all about trying to avoid the inevitable in some ways, but also embracing your destiny. It kind of does both. And it's really strange, because you'd think that a movie like this that wants to tackle that would be confused in its nature, but it's not. It makes perfect sense. It's all explained really well, and the acting is there to move us through that. Timothée Chalamet's performance is seamless here, and Paul Atreides in this conflict is just fascinating to watch on screen. He might be one of my favorite characters that I have seen grace a movie screen in a very long time. You also get to see Lady Jessica. Once again, a fantastic performance from Rebecca Ferguson. Kills it here. Maybe an even bigger evolution as a character than Paul Atreides. Arguably. They both do a lot in this movie. And Lady Jessica is phenomenal. Such an interesting character. And when you watch part one with part two, I think you're going to really love the nuances of this character and the way that it evolves. There's a lot of groundwork in part one, especially for Lady Jessica, I felt, that really come to fruition in the second part. There's some other characters in here, like Gurney, who I think gets a really nice arc in here. Once again, Josh Brolin, fantastic as this character. And there has been a lot of murmuring about Anya Taylor-Joy. She's in this movie. I'm not going to say who she's playing, what she's doing, because I do think that's a part of this journey. But I think what she does is very fascinating for this franchise as a whole. But there's just so many glorious moments here. I think also there's a sequence, you kind of see some black and white in the trailer. That scene was badass. It really was. Some people have been saying that that's the best scene in the movie. I don't know about that. It's amazing, and I think in a normal movie it would be. But there's just so many great moments in here. I think one that sticks out is one that plays at the end of the first trailer between Austin Butler and Timothée Chalamet. That was my favorite scene. That was movie magic. I truly feel that. But that's all the detail I can go into, I'm afraid. Technically, this thing is better than the first one, which is crazy because the first one was already a technical achievement. Sound, cinematography, production design, costumes, all leveled up here. All so immersive. Cinematography is so pretty, and there's a practicality behind this that make the visual effects really stand out, really pop and enhance the movie. You just don't see that very often nowadays with visual effects. It all looks so fake, and Dune Part 2 has a level of authenticity to it. Nothing looks out of place here. Not a single thing looks out of place here, because I think there's a level of practicality to it. It just makes this world come alive. It feels so tangible. Just amazing stuff. You also have Hans Zimmer's fantastic score. We already heard a lot of it in the first part. It is iconic, incredible. And this one, it builds off that, but a lot of the themes still remain kind of the same. It's just added a lot of tones to it. There are some new tracks here for sure that add a lot to this movie. Overall, the score is incredible. Amazing stuff. I would love to watch this movie with a live orchestra. I think it calls for that. It's one of those movies. This is really hard. I want to talk about everything in this movie. I really do. Ever since I saw it, I've just been gushing with joy at this movie. And all of these moments just make that up. I will do a spoiler review probably around the release date of this movie so that we can talk about all the goodness around the ending and every single act, every single moment before that, because it's just fascinating stuff. It's an interesting franchise that brings something new to the table, and to me is some of the most definitive stuff in the sci-fi genre that you could see. Dune Part 2 has quality written all over it. I don't know what to tell you. I highly, highly recommend you check it out. I think this is an essential viewing. It is one of those movies that comes along once in a generation that will be remembered, I think, as a classic in cinema. I really do. There is an accessibility to this that I think Part 1 didn't quite have. Part 1 had a little bit more of a slower pacing as it was trying to set everything up. Part 2 moves a lot more quicker. There's a lot more things happening. It's more grand. It's more epic. A lot of the things that I think that people said were missing from Part 1 happen in Dune Part 2. So that's why I really, really recommend this to every single person. Go watch this movie. Honestly, I do think Dune Part 2 will probably be a lock for my best picture at the 3rd Annual Eddie Awards. I really do. I find it really difficult to think that another movie is going to top what this does this year. I do think it is one of the best movies I've ever seen. I'm going to watch this many times. I'm going to watch it a few more times in the theater with as many people as I can, because it is deserving of that. It's deserving of as much money as I can give this. I really, really think that. This movie to me is a 5 out of 5, obviously. I don't have a single flaw with this movie. There's a lot to talk about here that I do think I'm missing out on because I don't want to spoil things. There's just such richness to this world, so many things to discuss, and I cannot wait for you to see that for yourself. Just also want to really extend a hand of gratitude here, because this was the Brisbane premiere, the screening that I attended, and it was an amazing experience that I got to take my fiance to, and we just had a great time watching this on a massive screen with just this exclusivity to it. It just felt really, really cool. It felt like an honor and a privilege, and a lot of that wouldn't have been possible without you guys watching and supporting this channel. It really does mean the world to me. I cannot thank you enough, and I hope to just take you along this ride with me. It was amazing, and I thank you so much. Anyway, those are my thoughts towards Dune Part 2. When you see this movie, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm happy to talk about this for days on end. This has just been crazy, this movie. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.